The clatter of crystal glasses stopped mid-clink. A slice of red velvet cake hovered on a silver fork, frozen in the air. The atmosphere in the private banquet hall chilled like a Colorado snowstorm. I stood there, at the edge of the room, still wearing my pressed Army combat uniform, the one I'd worn with pride for 22 years. It was now speckled with frosting and sweat, thanks to hours spent setting up tables, coordinating servers, and organizing someone else's party. That someone was General Arthur Monroe, my daughter's father-in-law. A man I had never even met, and the woman who put me in this position, my daughter, my own flesh and blood, Haley. She had smiled that tight, polished, designer dress smile and whispered, "Mom, you're used to logistics, right? You can handle the whole party. Just blend in, yeah? It's better if no one notices you." But when one of the guests, her husband Bradley's cousin, a smug woman with a clutch bag worth more than my monthly pension, snapped at me, "Miss, there's a spill by the dessert table. Can you be useful and wipe it up?" I looked around the room, then said loudly, clearly, deliberately, "I'm a soldier, not a maid." The room froze. Bradley turned pale. Haley looked like she'd just swallowed a lemon. And that's when the double doors opened. General Arthur Monroe had just arrived. I never thought my own daughter would be ashamed of me. Not after everything we'd been through together. My name is Erin Callahan, and for 22 years I served in the United States Army with honor and distinction. I'd risen to the rank of staff sergeant in logistics, coordinating supply chains in some of the most dangerous corners of the world. I'd survived 3 deployments to the Middle East, countless sleepless nights tracking medical supplies, and the pain of missing my daughter's dance recitals and birthdays. I did it all for her, for Haley. To give her stability after her father walked out when she was 8. To show her what strength looked like. To pay for her education so she could have choices I never had. Colorado Springs had been our home since my retirement 2 years ago. I chose it because the military community was strong here, and I thought it would be good for us both, a place where my service would be understood, respected. The irony wasn't lost on me when Haley met and fell in love with Bradley Monroe during her final year at Colorado College. Bradley, son of decorated General Arthur Monroe, heir to a family legacy of military service and old money. The kind of family that lived in a sprawling mansion in the Broadmoor neighborhood, with views of Cheyenne Mountain and garden parties attended by the highest-ranking officers from the nearby Air Force Academy. "Mom, he's amazing," she'd gushed over coffee 2 years ago. "His family has this incredible history. His great-grandfather was at Normandy. His grandfather served in Vietnam. His father is General Arthur Monroe." I remembered nodding, genuinely happy for her. "That's wonderful, honey. They must understand the military life." Her smile had faltered just slightly. "Well, it's different for them. They're officers." That should have been my first clue. The wedding was elaborate, held at the Broadmoor Hotel. I wore my dress blues, the appropriate formal attire for a retired non-commissioned officer attending such an event. I was proud of my medals, my service, my rank, but I noticed how Haley steered me away from certain guests. How she introduced me briefly as my mom without mentioning my military career. How Bradley's mother, Elaine, looked me up and down with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Oh, you were enlisted," she'd said, emphasizing the word like it was a curious disease. After the wedding, the invitations to family gatherings became sparse. When I did attend, Haley would call beforehand, "Maybe wear something more. Civilian, Mom? Normal clothes." I tried to understand. I tried to blend in. But I never apologized for who I was or what I'd done. Then, 3 days ago, Haley called in a panic. "Mom, I need your help. It's father-in-law's 60th birthday this weekend. It's this huge event at the Officers Club, and the party planner just quit. I'm completely overwhelmed." "Of course I'll help," I said immediately. "What do you need?" "Everything," she breathed. "The caterers need coordination, the flowers are wrong, the seating chart is a disaster. You're good at logistics, right? Could you run it?" I should have asked more questions. I should have realized this wasn't just about helping my daughter. "I'll be there," I promised. The day of the party, I arrived at the Officers Club early, dressed in my ACU's Army combat uniform. Not my dress blues, because this was work, not ceremony. I was there to solve problems, move supplies, coordinate people. This was a logistics operation, and I dressed accordingly. Haley's face when she saw me said everything. "Mom." she hissed, pulling me aside. What are you wearing? My uniform, I said simply. You needed logistics help. This is what I wear for operations. This isn't an operation. It's a sophisticated birthday party for one of the most respected generals in the state. Everyone here is in cocktail attire. I looked her straight in the eyes. You asked for my help as a logistics expert. That's who I am. That's what I'm dressed for. She pressed her lips together, clearly calculating the time it would take me to go home and change versus the crisis of not having anyone to manage the event. Fine, she said finally. Just try to stay behind the scenes. The kitchen staff entrance is that way, and so it began. For 6 hours, I coordinated the arrival of 3 different catering companies, resolved a crisis with the ice sculpture, reorganized the seating chart to accommodate last-minute guests, and directed the band setup. I worked tirelessly, efficiently, just as I had for 2 decades in service to my country. Not once did Haley introduce me to any of the arriving guests. Not once did Bradley acknowledge my presence beyond a curt nod. I became invisible, a worker bee in camouflage, moving among the glamorous butterflies in their silks and suits. I told myself it didn't matter. I was doing this for my daughter, not for recognition. But each time I overheard snippets of conversation, who is that woman in fatigues? Some hired help, I think. Something hardened inside me. The final straw came just before the guest of honor was due to arrive. I was checking the dessert table when a woman in a designer dress approached, champagne glass in hand. Excuse me, she said, not bothering to make eye contact. Someone spilled wine by the gift table. Could you clean that up? The general will be here any minute, and it looks terribly messy. I turned to face her fully. She was Bradley's cousin. I recognized her from wedding photos. She still hadn't bothered to look at my face. I'm sorry, I said calmly. I think you've misunderstood my role here. She finally glanced up, annoyed. You're the help, aren't you? That's obviously not cocktail attire. She gestured dismissively at my uniform. Something snapped inside me. 22 years of service. 3 deployments. A Bronze Star for valor during a supply route ambush in Kandahar. Reduced to the help at my own daughter's father-in-law's birthday party. I straightened my back, squared my shoulders, and raised my voice just enough to be heard by those nearby. I'm a soldier. Not a maid. The room went silent around us. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The cousin's face flushed red. And that's when the double doors opened. And General Arthur Monroe walked in. General Monroe was exactly as I'd imagined him, tall, distinguished with the ramrod-straight posture that comes from decades of command. His chest bore rows of ribbons and medals that told a story of valor and service. His silver hair was cropped in a perfect military cut, and his eyes, sharp blue, seemed to assess the entire room in seconds. Those eyes landed on me. I instinctively stood at attention, a reflex from years of service. Not because he outranked me, I was retired now, but out of professional respect. The silence in the room was deafening. I could feel Haley's mortification radiating from across the room where she stood frozen beside Bradley. The cousin who had demanded I clean the spill had backed away, melting into the crowd. General Monroe walked directly toward me, his gait purposeful. The sea of guests parted before him. I remained still, chin up, shoulders back. At ease. Soldier, he said when he reached me, his voice carrying through the silent room. I relaxed my stance slightly, but maintained eye contact. Sir? I responded automatically. He studied my uniform, taking in the unit patches, the rank insignia, the service stripes on my sleeve indicating my years of service. His eyes lingered on the combat patch on my right shoulder, evidence of deployment to a combat zone. Name and rank, he said. Not unkindly, but with the natural authority of someone used to command. Staff Sergeant Aaron Callahan, United States Army retired, sir. 7th Logistics Battalion. Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. Callahan, he repeated. 7th Logistics out of Kandahar, 2009. My heart skipped a beat. Yes, sir. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. You're the one who rerouted medical supplies after the convoy ambush near Lashkar Gah. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes, sir. The memory flashed vividly. The frantic radio calls, the reports of casualties, the desperate scramble to get blood supplies and medical equipment to a forward surgical team whose convoy had been hit by IEDs. I'd coordinated an emergency airdrop against orders, risking my career to save lives. The general extended his hand. I never thought I'd meet you in person, Sergeant Callahan. That was my son's unit. Your actions saved his life along with a dozen others. I shook his hand, stunned. I was just doing my job, sir. Above and beyond, Sergeant. Above and beyond. He turned to the crowd, still holding my hand in a firm grip. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to one of the finest non-commissioned officers I've had the privilege to serve alongside, though we never met until tonight. Staff Sergeant Callahan's quick thinking and courage under fire saved the lives of 13 soldiers, including my youngest son, Michael. The room remained silent. But now it was a different kind of silence, one filled with dawning realization and shifting perceptions. From the corner of my eye, I saw Haley's expression transform from mortification to confusion. Bradley stood beside her, his face pale, eyes darting between his father and me. The general turned back to me. "What brings you to my birthday celebration, Sergeant Callahan? I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list, though you'd certainly be welcome." Before I could answer, Haley stepped forward, her designer heels clicking rapidly across the polished floor. Her face was a mask of composure, though I could see the panic behind her eyes. "Father," she said, her voice unnaturally high, "I'd like to introduce you to my mother." The general's eyebrows shot up. He looked from Haley to me and back again. "Your mother?" Bradley moved forward to stand beside his wife. "Yes, sir. This is Haley's mother. We, asked her to help coordinate some of the event details, since our party planner canceled last minute." Understanding dawned on the general's face, followed by something that looked remarkably like disappointment as he glanced at his son. "I see. So you asked a decorated combat veteran, your mother-in-law, to serve as an unpaid event coordinator without bothering to mention her relationship to the family or her service to this country?" Bradley's face flushed. I didn't know about her service record, sir." "You didn't ask," the general said flatly. It wasn't a question. He turned back to me. "Sergeant Callahan, I owe you a profound debt of gratitude, both for my son Michael's life and, it seems, for saving this event tonight. But I must apologize for the way you've been treated. This is unacceptable." "Sir, there's no need," I began, uncomfortable with the growing tension. "There is every need," he interrupted firmly. He released my hand and turned to address the room. "Change of plans, everyone. Before dinner is served, I'd like Staff Sergeant Callahan to join me at the head table. In fact, I don't want a toast from anyone tonight unless it comes from Sergeant Callahan." "The only person in this room who's earned my respect before even meeting me," a murmur rippled through the crowd. I caught fragments of surprised conversations, saw the shifting body language as guests reassessed me. No longer invisible. No longer the help. The general offered me his arm, a courtly gesture from another era. "Shall we, Sergeant?" I hesitated, looking at Haley. Her face was unreadable now, a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't decipher. I wanted to go to her, to explain, to fix whatever was breaking between us. But the weight of years being diminished, being hidden away, being asked to be less than I was, it kept me rooted in place. I looked the general in the eye. "Thank you, sir, but before we proceed, I need a moment with my daughter." He nodded, understanding immediately. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He stepped back, giving us space. I walked toward Haley, ignoring the stares, the whispers, the entire room full of people who had looked through me all evening. In that moment, I wasn't a soldier or a server or even a mother. I was simply a woman who had finally had enough. "Haley," I said softly as I reached her, "can we talk privately for a moment?" Her perfect makeup couldn't hide the flush of embarrassment spreading across her cheeks. She nodded stiffly, avoiding eye contact with both me and the curious onlookers around us. Bradley started to follow, but a sharp look from his father stopped him in his tracks. We found a small anteroom just off the main hall. Once the door closed behind us, the sounds of the party became muffled, creating a strange bubble of tension between us. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Haley blurted out before I could speak. "I had no idea you knew General Monroe or that you saved his son. If I'd known—" "If you'd known?" I interrupted quietly. "Would you have introduced me as your mother instead of hiding me in the kitchen?" Her words died on her lips. She looked down at her designer shoes, Jimmy Choo, if I had to guess, certainly not something a staff sergeant's salary could ever afford. "That's what I thought," I continued, keeping my voice level. 22 years in the military had taught me that the quieter you speak in moments of conflict, the more weight your words carry. This isn't about the general or his son, Haley. This is about you being ashamed of me. I'm not ashamed. she protested weakly. Then what would you call it? You asked me to come help, but you didn't want anyone to know I was your mother. You had me enter through the service entrance. You haven't introduced me to a single one of your in-laws in the 2 years you've been married. Tears welled in her eyes. It's complicated, Mom. Explain it to me then, I said, folding my arms. Help me understand what's so complicated about being proud of where you come from. She sank onto a small settee, suddenly looking much younger than her 28 years. The Monroes? They're different from us, Mom. They have expectations, standards. And I don't meet those standards? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It's not just about you, she said, wiping carefully at her eyes to preserve her makeup. It's about fitting in. Bradley's family, they're all Ivy League graduates. They're officers, not enlisted. They have vacation homes and investment portfolios and generations of connections. The first time I met Bradley's mother, she asked me where I summered as a child. Despite everything, I almost laughed. And what did you tell her? I told her we went to Grandma's house in Nebraska, Haley admitted. She looked at me like I'd said we vacationed on Mars. I sat down beside her. So you decided it would be easier to, what, reinvent yourself? Pretend you weren't raised by a single mom who served her country? Her silence was answer enough. Do you know what I did in Kandahar in 2009? I asked her. She shook her head. Our forward operating base received word that a convoy had been hit. Multiple casualties, including the son of a high-ranking officer, though I didn't know that at the time. They needed blood, surgical supplies, everything. But the roads weren't secure, and air support was tied up elsewhere. I paused, remembering the frantic hours, the desperate calculations. I requisitioned a helicopter that was supposed to transport a colonel to a meeting in Kabul. I diverted medical supplies that were earmarked for another base. I broke about a dozen regulations and risked court-martial because people were dying and the system was moving too slowly. Haley was looking at me now. Really looking at me perhaps for the first time in years. That's why I wear this uniform with pride, I continued. Not because of the rank or the medals, but because it reminds me of who I am and what I stand for. I make hard decisions. I put others first. I don't back down when lives are at stake, even if it means breaking the rules. I reached out and took her hand. I taught you to be strong, Haley. To stand up for yourself and others. When did that change? When did you start believing you needed to be someone else to be worthy? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know, Mom, When I met Bradley, his world seemed so perfect. So secure, everything I never had growing up. I was afraid if they knew where I came from, they'd see I didn't belong. And what about me? I asked softly. Where do I fit in this perfect new life you've created? She couldn't answer, and that silence broke my heart more than any words could have. I stood up. I love you, Haley. That will never change. But I won't be hidden away like something shameful. I won't pretend to be less than I am to make other people comfortable. Not even for you. What are you saying? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. I'm saying I'm going back out there to accept the general's invitation because he's shown me more respect in 5 minutes than your husband's family has in 2 years. And tomorrow, you and I are going to have a longer conversation about what kind of relationship we want going forward. She stood too, panic evident in her eyes. Mom, please don't make a scene. This night is important for Bradley's career. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful, accomplished, confused young woman who had somehow lost her way, and felt a mixture of love and disappointment so profound it almost knocked me off my feet. The scene was already made. Haley, when you decided I wasn't good enough to be acknowledged as your mother. I turned and walked back into the main hall, head high, shoulders back. Behind me, I heard Haley's quiet sobs, and it took everything in me not to turn back, to comfort her as I had since she was small. But sometimes love means standing firm when it would be easier to give in. The party had resumed its nervous chatter when I returned, though all eyes turned to me as I made my way to where General Monroe stood conversing with a group of officers. He smiled when he saw me approach. Ah, Sergeant Callahan. Everything sorted? Not entirely, sir, I answered honestly. But I've said what needed to be said. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Family is complicated, especially when it intersects with duty and service. Yes, sir. He offered me his arm again. Now, shall we head to our table? I've taken the liberty of adjusting the seating chart. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like you at my right hand this evening. As we walked to the head table, I caught sight of Bradley hurrying to comfort Haley, who had emerged from the anteroom with carefully reapplied makeup and reddened eyes. He shot me a look of pure resentment, and I realized with sudden clarity that my relationship with my daughter might never be the same after tonight. But sometimes the price of self-respect is painfully high. Dinner was an elaborate affair. 5 courses of gourmet cuisine served on fine china with polished silver. I sat at General Monroe's right hand, as promised, acutely aware of how out of place my combat uniform looked amidst the evening wear and mess dress uniforms surrounding me. Yet strangely, for the first time that evening, I didn't feel out of place. The general made sure of that. Throughout the meal, he engaged me in conversation, drawing out stories of my service, my deployments, my expertise in logistics. He listened with genuine interest, asking insightful questions that revealed his deep understanding of the challenges faced by those in my position. Most officers never fully appreciate the backbone of the military, the NCOs who make everything actually work, he commented at one point, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I learned early in my career that the smartest thing an officer can do is listen to their sergeants. From across the table, a silver-haired woman in an elegant navy dress, who I later learned was the general's sister, Catherine, leaned forward. Arthur always said the best education he received wasn't at West Point, but from his first sergeant, who, in his words, taught him how not to get his men killed through sheer stupidity. The table laughed, and I found myself smiling despite everything. My brother has always valued substance over appearance, Catherine continued, her shrewd eyes assessing me, a trait that seems increasingly rare these days. I felt her comment was pointed, though at whom I wasn't entirely sure. Perhaps at the entire gathering with its carefully curated guest list and social hierarchies. Speaking of substance, the general said, raising his glass, I'd like to propose a toast. The room quieted immediately. Not to myself, though it is, ostensibly my birthday, but to the quiet heroes who serve without expectation of recognition. To the men and women who make difficult decisions when lives are on the line, regardless of regulations or personal risk. He turned to me. To Staff Sergeant Callahan, whose quick thinking and moral courage saved 13 lives, including my son Michael's in Kandahar in 2009. May we all serve with such honor. To Sergeant Callahan, echoed around the room as glasses were raised. I took a small sip of my wine, uncomfortable with the attention, yet moved by the sincerity in the general's words. As I set my glass down, I caught sight of Haley and Bradley at a table near the back of the room. Bradley was leaning close to her, whispering urgently. She was nodding, her face a mask of composure, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. The general followed my gaze. Family complications, he murmured sympathetically. My son appears to be cut from different cloth than I'd hoped. He's young, I found myself defending Bradley, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps because, despite everything, he was still my daughter's husband. They both are. Youth is no excuse for a lack of character, the general replied, his voice low enough that only I could hear. But you're kind to say so. After dinner came the speeches. Various colleagues and family members rose to honor the general with anecdotes and well wishes. Some were genuinely touching, others clearly political maneuvering for favor or connection. Through it all, the general sat with patient dignity, accepting the accolades with humble nods and occasional self-deprecating comments. Finally, it was his turn to speak. He rose to his feet, commanding the room without effort. Thank you all for coming tonight. At 60, a man begins to reflect on what truly matters in life. Not the promotions or the medals or the accolades, though I'm grateful for all of them, but the people who have shaped us, challenged us, sometimes even saved us. He glanced down at me. Tonight has brought an unexpected blessing, the chance to thank someone who saved my son's life, though until a few hours ago, I didn't even know what she looked like. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. When I look back on my career, I'm proudest, not of the battles won or the strategies executed, but of the lives impacted. The soldiers who served under my command who went on to lead lives of purpose and integrity. The civilians protected by our efforts. The families supported through the hardest of times. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Service isn't about rank or recognition. It's about putting others before yourself, especially when it costs you something. I felt the weight of his words, understanding they were meant not just for the room at large, but for his son and my daughter specifically. Before we move on to cake and further celebrations, I have one request. Sergeant Callahan, he turned to me, would you honor us with a few words? I froze. Public speaking had never been my strong suit, and I certainly hadn't prepared anything. But refusing a general's request, especially on his birthday, wasn't an option. I rose slowly to my feet, acutely conscious of every eye in the room on me. For a moment, I considered playing it safe, offering bland congratulations, expressing gratitude for the invitation, and sitting back down. But as I looked around the room, at all the faces that had looked through me just hours earlier, at my daughter's tense expression, at Bradley's barely concealed resentment, I knew this was a moment for truth. Thank you, General Monroe, I began, my voice steady despite my nerves. I'm not one for speeches, but I've learned that sometimes the most important things need to be said out loud. I took a breath. 22 years ago, I joined the Army as a single mother with a 6-year-old daughter. I had no family support, no college education, and very few options. What I did have was determination and a desire to create a better life for my child. I glanced at Haley, whose eyes were fixed on her plate. Military service taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was this. Your worth isn't determined by your rank or your background or your education. It's determined by your actions under pressure, by the choices you make when no one is watching, by your willingness to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. The room was utterly silent now. In Kandahar in 2009, I didn't know I was saving a general's son. I was just trying to get medical supplies to wounded soldiers because that was my job and their lives mattered. I would have done the same for any private or specialist or sergeant in that convoy. I looked directly at the general. That's what service means to me, sir. Seeing people for who they are, not for their rank or status or connections. Treating everyone with the same respect and dignity, whether they're scrubbing floors or commanding battalions. I paused, gathering courage for my final words. I'm honored to be here tonight, General Monroe. Not because you're a general, but because you're a leader who recognizes that true value lies in character, not appearance. In a world increasingly focused on the superficial, that's something worth celebrating. I raised my glass. To General Monroe. May your example of genuine leadership continue to inspire for many years to come. To General Monroe, echoed through the room. As I sat down, the general leaned close. Perfectly said, Sergeant Callahan. Direct, honest, and with just the right amount of pointed message for those who needed to hear it. He smiled, a twinkle in his eye. I think you and I are going to get along very well. As the formal dinner portion of the evening concluded, the atmosphere in the grand hall shifted. The string quartet in the corner transitioned from classical pieces to more contemporary melodies, and servers began circulating with trays of desserts and after-dinner drinks. The celebration was entering its more relaxed phase, though relaxed among this crowd still meant impeccable posture and carefully modulated laughter. I excused myself from the head table, needing a moment alone to process everything that had happened. The night had taken such an unexpected turn that I felt emotionally whiplashed. The general graciously understood, patting my hand before turning to engage with another well-wisher. I found a quiet corner near tall windows overlooking the illuminated gardens of the Officers' Club. The Colorado night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights, Pikes Peak a dark shadow against the horizon. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Sergeant Callahan? I turned to find a young man in dress blues approaching. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the general's same sharp blue eyes. Michael Monroe, he introduced himself, extending his hand. I understand I owe you my life. I shook his hand, recognizing him now. Captain Monroe, I remember your case from the medical reports, though we never met. Shrapnel wounds to the abdomen and right leg, if I recall correctly. He nodded, a look of surprise crossing his face. You remember the specific injuries? I remember all 13 casualties from that day, I said quietly. 6 with shrapnel wounds, 4 with blast injuries, 2 with gunshot wounds, and 1 with severe burns. I tracked every case until all were evacuated to Germany. He studied me with newfound respect. They told us later that the medical supplies arrived against all odds, that someone had bent every rule in the book to get us what we needed. I never knew who it was. Just doing my job, I said, the standard response. No, he replied firmly. It was far beyond that. The surgeon who operated on me said they were down to their last units of blood when your delivery arrived. Without those supplies, I wouldn't be standing here. He gestured to his right leg. I still have a slight limp when I'm tired, but considering the alternative, I count myself incredibly fortunate. An awkward silence fell between us. What do you say to someone whose life you helped save? What does he say to you? I understand you're Bradley's mother-in-law, he finally said. Yes, Haley is my daughter. He nodded thoughtfully. I missed their wedding. I was deployed. This is actually the first time I've met her. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Bradley and I have never been particularly close, despite being half-brothers. This was news to me. Half-brothers? Different mothers, he explained. My mother was the general's first wife. She passed away when I was 12. Eleanor, Bradley's mother, became his stepmother when I was 14. Bradley came along a year later. The family dynamic suddenly made more sense. I see. I doubt Bradley ever mentioned me, Michael continued with a wry smile. He prefers to present a certain curated image of the Monroe family. Before I could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of an elegant older woman in an expensive black dress, her silver hair swept into an immaculate updo. I recognized her immediately as Eleanor Monroe, Bradley's mother and the general's current wife, though we had never been formally introduced. Michael. Darling, she said, completely ignoring my presence. Your father is looking for you. Something about a photo with all the military academy graduates? In a moment, Eleanor, he replied, his tone cooling noticeably. I'm having an important conversation with Sergeant Callahan. Eleanor's eyes flicked to me, taking in my combat uniform with barely concealed distaste. Yes, well, how touching. But the photographer won't wait all night, dear. Michael's jaw tightened. Sergeant Callahan saved my life in Afghanistan, Eleanor. I think the photographer can wait 5 minutes while I express my gratitude. Eleanor's perfectly composed expression faltered for just a second. Of course, she recovered smoothly. How thoughtless of me. Please, carry on. She turned to leave, then paused, finally addressing me directly. Sergeant, I understand you're Haley's mother. How interesting. She never mentioned her mother was in the military. The comment was designed to sting, and I won't pretend it didn't. But years of dealing with difficult superiors had taught me how to maintain my composure. My daughter and I have different perspectives on what details of our lives are worth sharing. I replied evenly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the subtle jab. Indeed, well, family can be so complicated, can't it? Especially when there are such diverse backgrounds involved. Michael stepped forward slightly, positioning himself partially between us. Eleanor, I believe Dad is waiting for you as well. With a tight smile and a nod, she departed, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in her wake. I apologize for my stepmother, Michael said once she was out of earshot. She has certain views about social hierarchy that belong in the last century. No apology necessary, I assured him. I've dealt with far worse than passive-aggressive comments in designer clothing. He laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. I can imagine. Listen, would you allow me to introduce you to some people who would very much like to meet you? Several of my fellow officers from that deployment are here tonight. For the next hour, I found myself surrounded by officers who treated me with a level of respect I hadn't experienced since retirement. They listened to my perspective on logistics challenges, shared their own stories from deployments, and treated me as a valued colleague rather than the help. It was a stark contrast to the earlier portion of the evening. Across the room, I occasionally caught glimpses of Haley. She seemed to be circulating through the party on Bradley's arm, playing the perfect political wife, though her smile appeared increasingly strained. Several times I saw her glance in my direction, but she made no move to approach. As the evening wore on, I found myself in conversation with Catherine, the general's sister, who turned out to be a retired federal judge. My brother has always had excellent judgment of character, she commented, sipping her brandy. When he singles someone out for attention, it's never without good reason. He's been very kind, I acknowledged. Arthur isn't kind for kindness' sake, she replied bluntly. He's kind when it's deserved. There's a difference. She studied me over the rim of her glass. You've raised quite a daughter. Poised, intelligent, ambitious. Thank you, I said, though I sensed a qualification coming. Perhaps too ambitious in some ways, Catherine continued. She reminds me of Eleanor when she first set her sights on Arthur. So determined to rise above her circumstances that she was willing to adjust certain aspects of herself. I wasn't sure how to respond to this surprisingly candid assessment of my daughter from a virtual stranger. Catherine must have sensed my discomfort. Forgive me. Decades on the bench made me too direct for polite company. I simply mean to say that youth and ambition can be a dangerous combination. The desire to belong can sometimes lead us to betray the very parts of ourselves that make us worthy of belonging in the first place. Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. Wasn't that exactly what had happened with Haley? In her desire to fit into this world of wealth and privilege, she had discarded the values I had worked so hard to instill in her: honesty, integrity, pride in who you are regardless of circumstances. The true test of character, Catherine continued, isn't how we behave when everything is going our way. It's what we do when faced with difficult choices, when standing up for what's right might cost us something we want. I thought of my decision in Kandahar, of the risk I'd taken breaking protocols to get those medical supplies through. And I thought of tonight, of my refusal to be hidden away or diminished, even at the cost of my relationship with my daughter. I believe you've already passed that test many times over. Sergeant Callahan, Catherine said, as if reading my thoughts. The question is whether your daughter will follow your example or continue down her current path. Before I could respond, there was a commotion near the entrance to the hall. A server had dropped a tray of champagne glasses, sending crystal shards skittering across the marble floor. In the momentary confusion, I saw Haley slip away from Bradley's side and move purposefully toward the exit. Something in her posture, a rigid determination I recognized from her childhood, caught my attention. Without excusing myself from Catherine, I moved to follow. I found Haley in the ladies' room, standing before the mirror with both hands braced against the marble counter, head bowed. She was alone, thank goodness. The last thing we needed was an audience for what was clearly about to be an emotional confrontation. Haley, I said softly, letting the door close behind me. She looked up, our eyes meeting in the mirror. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the redness around her eyes or the tension in her jaw. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the gentle classical music piped in through hidden speakers and the distant murmur of the party continuing without us. Are you enjoying being the guest of honor? She finally asked, her voice brittle. That's not fair, I replied evenly, isn't it? She turned to face me directly. You've completely hijacked Bradley's father's birthday. Now it's all about you and your heroic service record. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that hurt often masquerades as anger. That wasn't my intention. I came here tonight because you asked for my help. I asked for your help with the event planning, not for you to embarrass me in front of my in-laws. The accusation stung. How exactly did I embarrass you, Haley? By wearing my uniform? By standing up for myself when I was mistaken for the cleaning staff? Or by accepting the general's acknowledgement of my service? She threw up her hands in frustration. You just don't get it. These people, this world, it operates by different rules. There are expectations, protocols? Like pretending your mother doesn't exist? I asked quietly. That's not, she began, then stopped. A flash of shame crossed her face. I never meant for it to go this far. I moved closer, leaning against the counter beside her. Then help me understand how we got here. When did you become ashamed of where you come from? When did you start believing you needed to be someone else to fit in? She sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. It wasn't one moment. It was gradual. When I first met Bradley, his world seemed so perfect, so secure. The kind of life I always wanted for us but could never have on your salary. The words hurt, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. A staff sergeant's pay had never afforded us luxury. We'd lived in base housing, shopped at the commissary, and vacationed at my mother's farm in Nebraska. Haley's clothes had come from discount stores, not boutiques. And her first car had been a 15-year-old Honda with over 200,000 miles on it. The first time Bradley took me to his parents' house, she continued, I was terrified of saying or doing the wrong thing. There were 3 forks at dinner. 3. I didn't know which one to use first. Despite everything, I almost smiled at the image of my confident daughter intimidated by silverware. Eleanor asked about my family, Haley went on. When I said my mom was in the army, she assumed you were an officer. When I clarified that you were enlisted, she got this look. Like I'd just admitted we lived in a trailer park. And that bothered you, I observed, not accusingly, just stating a fact. She looked down. It shouldn't have. I know that. But it did. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. I wanted so badly to belong in their world. To be good enough for Bradley. To never worry about money or status or security ever again. So you started hiding parts of yourself. And me, she nodded, a tear spilling down her cheek. At first it was just omitting details. Then it became active avoidance. And then it became who you were, I finished for her. A curated version of Haley Callahan, tailored to fit the Monroe family expectations. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I reached out and took her hand. I know, sweetheart. But good intentions don't lessen the pain. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings between us. I thought of all the times over the past 2 years when I'd felt my daughter slipping away from me. The canceled dinners, the superficial phone calls, the carefully managed holiday visits where she'd seemed constantly on edge, checking her phone, making excuses to leave early. What happens now? She asked, sounding suddenly very young. That depends on you, I replied honestly. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I won't hide my service or my rank or my background to make your in-laws comfortable. That's not who I raised you to be, and it's not who I'm going to be, even for you. She nodded slowly. I understand. Do you? I searched her face. Because this isn't just about tonight, Haley. This is about who you want to be going forward. Are you going to continue twisting yourself into knots to fit into a world that doesn't value your authentic self? Or are you going to remember what I taught you about integrity and self-respect? The door opened, and a woman in an evening gown entered, then hesitated upon seeing our serious expressions. Oh, I'm sorry. I can come back. No need, Haley said quickly, wiping at her tears. We were just leaving. We stepped out into the hallway, the sounds of the party growing louder. Before we rejoined the celebration, Haley touched my arm. Mom, I need some time to think. About everything. About who I've been becoming, I nodded. Take all the time you need. But remember, sweetheart, you never needed to change who you are to be worthy of love and respect. The right people will value you for exactly who you are. She gave me a tremulous smile. Like the general valued you tonight. Yes, I agreed. Like that. As we walked back toward the main hall, Bradley appeared, his face tight with barely controlled anger. There you are, he said to Haley, not acknowledging my presence at all. Everyone's asking where you've been. The general is about to cut the cake. I needed a moment with my mother, Haley replied, a new firmness in her voice that made me proud. Bradley's eyes flicked to me, then back to his wife. Well, the moment's over. We need to get back in there and do damage control. Haley stiffened. Damage control? Yes, damage control, he hissed, lowering his voice though I could still hear every word. Your mother has completely hijacked Dad's birthday with her war stories and her uniform. Everyone's talking about it. Mom is mortified. I saw the conflict play across my daughters. Face the old desire to please her husband warring. With the new spark of self-respect I'd seen moments ago in the bathroom, Bradley, she said carefully. Your father seems to appreciate my mother's presence. Maybe we should follow his lead. Bradley's face flushed. Follow his lead? Are you kidding me? She's embarrassing us, Haley. Can't you see that? She shows up in combat fatigues to a formal event, creates a scene with cousin Victoria, and then acts like she's some kind of war hero. She is a war hero, Haley interrupted, her voice rising slightly. She saved your uncle's life, Bradley. Did you even know that? Did you ever bother to ask about her service? I placed a hand on Haley's arm, not wanting this to escalate further. It's okay, sweetheart. Bradley's entitled to his opinion. No, Mom, it's not okay, Haley insisted, shaking off my hand. She turned back to her husband. I've spent 2 years hiding my mother and where I come from because I was afraid of not fitting in with your family. I've changed how I dress, how I talk, even what I believe in. And for what? So I could be acceptable to people who judge others based on their rank or their education or their bank account? Bradley looked stunned by this unexpected backbone from his usually compliant wife. Haley, you're making a scene. No, she replied firmly. I'm finally standing up for what's right. Something I should have learned from my mother a long time ago. She turned to me, a new determination in her eyes. I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm proud to be your daughter. And I'm done being ashamed of who I am and where I come from. In that moment, I saw my real daughter return, the strong, principled young woman I'd raised. Not the polished society wife she'd been pretending to be. And I knew, whatever happened next, we would be okay. The three of us stood frozen in the hallway, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Bradley's face had paled at Haley's unexpected declaration, his eyes darting between his wife and me as though searching for the familiar, compliant woman he'd married. You don't mean that, he finally said, his voice low and controlled. You're upset, I understand, but this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Haley straightened her shoulders, a gesture so reminiscent of my own military bearing that it made my heart swell with unexpected pride. No, Bradley, she replied calmly. This is exactly the time and place. I've spent 2 years pretending to be someone I'm not. I've hidden my mother, a decorated combat veteran, because she doesn't fit your family's image of what's acceptable. I'm done with that. Tonight. The distant sound of clinking glasses reached us, someone calling for attention in the main hall. Bradley's expression grew desperate. They're waiting for us for the cake cutting, he said. We need to get back in there now. We can discuss this later, in private. Lead the way, Haley said, her voice steady. But I'm done hiding. Bradley hesitated, clearly calculating his options, then nodded stiffly and turned toward the main hall. As Haley moved to follow him, I caught her arm gently. Are you sure about this? I asked quietly. You don't have to do this now. We can take time, figure things out. Her eyes so like mine met mine with newfound resolve. I'm sure, Mom, I should have done this a long time ago. Together, we walked back into the celebration. The crowd had gathered around a large table where an elaborate cake stood, adorned with military insignia and topped with candles spelling out 60. General Monroe stood beside it, looking slightly impatient until he caught sight of us approaching. Ah. There you are, he called out, his commanding voice carrying across the room. I was beginning to think we'd lost our guests of honor. Eleanor Monroe, standing rigidly at her husband's side, shot him a pointed look at the plural, guests of honor, but he either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. As we reached the cake table, the general gestured for Haley and me to join him. Bradley positioned himself on his father's other side, his face a careful mask of celebration that didn't reach his eyes. Before we cut the cake, the general announced to the assembled guests, I want to take a moment to reflect on what makes this birthday particularly special. He paused, surveying the room filled with military brass, political connections, and family members. Birthdays as we get older become less about adding another year and more about appreciating the time we've been given, time that for some of us in this room was nearly cut short. He turned slightly toward me. Earlier tonight, I had the unexpected honor of meeting Staff Sergeant Aaron Callahan, whose quick thinking and courage in Afghanistan saved 13 lives, including my son Michael's. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, bringing people together when we least expect it. The crowd murmured appreciatively, though I noticed several of the Monroe relatives shifting uncomfortably. What makes this even more remarkable, the general continued, is that Sergeant Callahan is also the mother of my daughter-in-law, Haley. He turned to Haley with a warm smile, a fact that until tonight I was unaware of. The pointed comment hung in the air. Bradley stiffened beside his father, while Eleanor's smile became even more rigidly fixed. It seems I have much to thank the Callahan women for, the general went on. One for saving my son's life, and the other for bringing such intelligence and grace into our family. Haley stepped forward then, and I saw a new confidence in her posture, reminiscent of the determined girl I'd raised, yet tempered with the poise of the woman she'd become. General Monroe, she said, her voice clear and steady, I have a confession to make, one that's long overdue. Bradley made a small, strangled sound beside his father, but the general merely raised an eyebrow, intrigued. For the past 2 years, Haley continued, I've been hiding an essential part of who I am. I've been ashamed of my background, of growing up as a military kid on bases around the world, of the struggle my mother faced raising me alone on an enlisted soldier's salary. A hush fell over the room. I stood perfectly still, feeling a complex mixture of pride and heartache as my daughter finally spoke her truth. I convinced myself that to be worthy of the Monroe name, I needed to be someone else. Someone more polished, more privileged, more acceptable. She glanced at Eleanor as she said this, who had gone very still. In doing so, I betrayed not only my mother but myself. I forgot the values she taught me: integrity, courage, and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Haley turned to face me fully now, tears glistening in her eyes. Mom, I am so deeply sorry. You've never been anything but a source of strength and inspiration. You raised me alone while serving your country, never complaining, never making excuses. You taught me what real strength looks like. And I repaid you by acting ashamed of who you are. The room was utterly silent now. Even the servers had paused, transfixed by the raw emotion unfolding before them. I am proud, so proud to be the daughter of Staff Sergeant Aaron Callahan, Haley declared, her voice ringing with conviction. And I'm done pretending otherwise. She turned back to the general. Sir, I apologize for the deception. If that changes how you feel about having me in your family, I understand. But I can no longer live a lie, even to keep the peace. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then General Monroe did something unexpected. He laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine delight, his eyes crinkling at the corners. My dear, he said warmly, that is the most Monroe thing you've done since joining this family. He looked around the room, addressing the gathering at large. The Monroe military tradition isn't about pedigree or social status. It's about courage under fire, moral backbone, and doing what's right regardless of personal cost. Qualities that Sergeant Callahan clearly instilled in her daughter. He placed a hand on Haley's shoulder. I'm proud to call you family. Both of you, he added, nodding to me. Eleanor stepped forward then, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly together. Arthur, perhaps this family discussion could continue in private. No, Eleanor, the general interrupted firmly. I think we've had quite enough privacy. Too many things in this family happen behind closed doors, where appearances can be maintained and truths concealed. He looked directly at Bradley, who seemed to shrink under his father's gaze. Integrity isn't a uniform you put on for public occasions, the general continued. It's the foundation of everything we do, in public and in private. Something I thought I had taught my sons. Michael stepped forward from the crowd, coming to stand beside me. You taught me, Dad, he said quietly. Some lessons take longer to sink in than others. Bradley's face flushed with humiliation. I almost felt sorry for him, caught between his father's disappointment and his wife's unexpected rebellion. I think, the general said, addressing the room again, that this birthday has given me the greatest gift of all truth. And with that, let's cut this cake before the candles melt entirely. The tension broke somewhat as servers stepped forward, the knife was presented, and the ceremonial cutting began. As the crowd's attention shifted to the cake, I felt a gentle touch on my arm. It was Catherine, the general's sister. Well done, she murmured. Though I suspect this evening isn't quite over yet. She was right. As the cake was being distributed, Eleanor Monroe approached me, her expression carefully composed. Sergeant Callahan, she said, her voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. I believe we need to have a conversation. I believe we do, I agreed, meeting Eleanor's gaze steadily. We moved to a relatively quiet corner of the room as servers circulated with slices of cake and fresh champagne. The celebration had regained its rhythm, though I noticed more than a few curious glances in our direction. Eleanor's posture was impeccable, her expression unreadable behind her society smile. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, that expensive creams couldn't quite erase evidence of a woman approaching 60 who was fighting at every step of the way. You've caused quite a disruption this evening, she began. That wasn't my intention, I replied calmly. I came because my daughter asked for my help. Yes, well, she adjusted her diamond bracelet. Intentions aside, the result has been rather dramatic. I waited, saying nothing. 22 years in the military had taught me the power of silence in negotiations. Eleanor sighed lightly. I suppose I should congratulate you. Arthur is clearly impressed by your service record. Not everyone manages to win his approval so thoroughly or so quickly. I wasn't seeking his approval, I pointed out. Just his respect. There's a difference. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Yes, there is. She glanced across the room to where Haley stood in conversation with Michael and the general, her face animated in a way I hadn't seen since before her wedding. Bradley hovered nearby, looking increasingly isolated. Your daughter loves my son, Eleanor said suddenly. Despite everything that's happened tonight, I believe that's true. I believe it too, I acknowledged. The question is whether he loves her enough to accept her for who she truly is, not who he wants her to be. Eleanor's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly. You think I don't understand that struggle? You think I don't know what it's like to remake yourself to fit someone else's expectations? The raw honesty in her voice surprised me. When I met Arthur, she continued more quietly. I was a 28-year-old administrative assistant from a middle-class family in Ohio. Nothing special, nothing distinguished. He was a rising star in the military, recently widowed, with a teenage son. Everyone told me I wasn't good enough for him. I studied her face, seeing beyond the careful makeup to the woman beneath. So you reinvented yourself. I did what was necessary, she corrected. I learned the rules, the protocols, the expectations. I transformed myself into the kind of wife a man of Arthur's position needed. And lost yourself in the process? I suggested gently. Her eyes snapped to mine, suddenly defensive. I gained a life most women would envy. Security, status, respect. Respect based on who your husband is, not who you are, I observed. The barb hit home. I could see it in the slight flinch she couldn't quite control. You know nothing about me, she said coldly. I know more than you think, I replied. I recognize the armor you're wearing, Eleanor. It's different from mine pearls instead of camouflage, but it serves the same purpose. Protection. The difference is, I never forgot who I was beneath my uniform. For a long moment, she stared at me, her carefully constructed defenses wavering. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed a short, genuine sound that transformed her face, making her appear years younger. You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, Sergeant, she sighed. Perhaps I should have taken that approach with Haley from the beginning, seen the strength in her background rather than something to be polished away. It's not too late, I suggested. She's still finding her way. Eleanor glanced again at Haley, then back to me. You raised a remarkable daughter despite challenging circumstances. That deserves acknowledgement. It wasn't quite an apology, but from a woman like Eleanor Monroe, it was probably as close as I would get. Thank you, I said simply. Don't thank me yet, she replied with a hint of her earlier sharpness. This evening has upended 2 years of careful integration into the Monroe family. There will be adjustments needed. On all sides, I agreed firmly. Before Eleanor could respond, Bradley approached, his expression tense. Mother, could I speak with you? Privately? Eleanor gave me a look that somehow managed to be both apologetic and warning. We'll continue this conversation another time. Sergeant Callahan. As they moved away, General Monroe appeared at my side, offering me a fresh glass of champagne. I see you've survived an encounter with Eleanor, he observed with dry humor. Not many do, at least not with their dignity intact. We found some common ground, I replied, accepting the champagne. Did you now? He raised an eyebrow. Wonders never cease. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the room. The party was beginning to wind down, with some guests making discreet departures. Your daughter has made quite an impression tonight, the general said finally. That kind of moral courage is rare, especially when it comes at personal cost. She gets it from her father, I replied with a small smile. He looked at me skeptically. Her father walked out when she was 8, I explained. It taught her early that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. The general nodded thoughtfully. A hard lesson, but valuable. The best ones usually are. He turned to face me directly then. Sergeant Callahan, I have a proposition for you. The Veterans Affairs Office at Peterson Space Force Base is looking for a new logistics coordinator. Someone with field experience who understands what our returning service members need. Someone who won't get lost in bureaucracy when lives are at stake. I stared at him, caught off guard. Are you offering me a job, sir? Suggesting one, he corrected. The position reports to an old friend of mine. I'd be happy to make an introduction, though your service record would speak for itself. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, he replied. Colorado Springs could use more people like you, Sergeant. And selfishly, I'd like the opportunity to get to know the woman who saved my son's life. Before I could respond, Haley approached, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Mom, she said softly. Can we talk? The general nodded respectfully and moved away, giving us privacy. Of course, sweetheart, I said, setting down my untouched champagne. Haley took a deep breath. I just had a long talk with Bradley. It didn't go well, my heart sank. I'm sorry, she shook her head. Don't be. It needed to happen. I told him I wouldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. That I'm proud of who I am and where I come from. How did he take it? He said I was being dramatic. That I was embarrassing him in front of his family and colleagues. She squared her shoulders. I told him that if he was embarrassed by who I really am, then maybe he married the wrong woman. I reached out and took her hand. Oh, Haley. It's okay, Mom, she said, surprising me with her calm certainty. Whatever happens with Bradley and me, I know I've done the right thing. I can look at myself in the mirror again. I squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you. I learned from the best, she replied with a tremulous smile. A woman who never compromised her integrity, even when it would have been easier. Across the room, I saw Bradley in intense conversation with his mother, both of them casting occasional glances in our direction. Michael and the general stood nearby, their expressions serious. What happens now? I asked gently. Haley sighed. I don't know. Bradley and I need to have some serious conversations. Maybe counseling. Maybe... She trailed off, unable to voice the alternative. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you, I assured her. Always. She nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped. The general offered me a place to stay tonight in their guest house. I think I'm going to take him up on it. Bradley and I need some space to figure things out. That sounds wise, I agreed. And I'm just a phone call away if you need me. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself standing once again at the windows overlooking the garden, watching as the last guests departed. The night had turned out so differently from what I had expected when I arrived in my combat uniform, ready to help with logistics and remain invisible. Catherine appeared beside me, her shrewd eyes taking in my thoughtful expression. Quite an evening, she commented. That's one way to put it, I agreed. You know, she said conversationally, in my years on the bench, I observed that it's often a single moment of truth that changes the entire trajectory of a person's life. One decision to stand firm rather than bend. I thought about my decision in Kandahar to break protocol and get those medical supplies through. About my decision tonight to refuse to be invisible. About Haley's decision to finally embrace her true self, whatever the cost. Sometimes those moments find us when we least expect them, I replied. Catherine smiled. Indeed they do. And how we respond reveals not who we want to be, but who we truly are. She patted my arm gently. Welcome to the family, Sergeant Callahan. I have a feeling you're going to shake things up around here. And God knows we need it. Later that night, as I drove back to my modest apartment on the outskirts of Colorado Springs, I reflected on the day's unexpected turns. I had arrived as the help and left as an honored guest. My daughter had begun the evening hiding her background and ended it embracing her truth, whatever the consequences. And somewhere in between, I had reclaimed a dignity that I hadn't even realized I'd been allowing others to diminish. My phone buzzed with a text from Haley. I love you, Mom. Thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like. I smiled in the darkness of my car. Whatever happened next with Haley's marriage, with the job opportunity the general had mentioned, with this newfound connection to the Monroe family, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would face it as I had faced everything in my life with integrity, with courage and with my head held high, because I was a soldier. Not in uniform only, but in spirit. And that was something no one could ever take away from me.